So today we are going to concentrate on making stocks, and we've got two different stocks that we're going to make. We're going to do a bone broth, which is kind of the cornerstone of the GAPS diet. Meat stock is also what I would consider a cornerstone, but it seems to be one that not a lot of people know about. And to be completely honest, I didn't know about it myself when I first started this 5 years ago, so I've come a long way. So let me share with you my favorite bone broth. I don't muck about. I don't make a chicken bone broth and then make a lamb bone broth and then make a beef bone broth. I don't have time for that. I'm a busy mum of two. I run two businesses and I cook every last bit of food in this house from scratch. There will be certain things in life that just have to give. Let me also say to you right at this very moment, I cleaned my stovetop for you guys today. My stovetop does not look like this normally, so please do not look at my stuff and go, oh my goodness, she's perfect. She's so not perfect. So I have cleaned that for you today. Okay, so onto our bone broth. What I was saying is that I don't make a different type of bone broth for every type of meat. I make a generic bone broth, and you have that recipe in your recipe section for week 1. Today I am using mainly beef. What I have here is some beef rib and neck bones. You'll see that there's a little bit of meat on them, but they're nice and bony, but they've got some meat. So what we're going to do is, with these bones, I want to brown them off in the oven. So I'm going to go ahead and pop them into the oven. I just pop them in the oven at about 180 degrees. I leave them in there for around an hour and a half, unless I forget about them, and they could sit there for 3 hours. And you know what? It's perfectly fine. They don't tend to burn too much, but what they do is they add a beautiful flavor to your bone broth, and that's perfectly acceptable to brown off your bones. So I'm going to take these, I'm going to pop them into the oven. By the way, because I like stories, I'm just going to tell you a little bit of a story about that little tray that I poked into the oven there. I stole that tray from my mother when I left home, and I think we've had that tray now probably since I was 10 years old. So you don't have to run out and buy brand new roasting trays. I think the oldest roasting trays are the best. They've got so much character. Okay, so what you'll see now is that I still have some bones left here. These are the marrow bones. I don't tend to roast these bones off, purely because there's a lot of fats that are available in the marrow of the bone. I don't want to damage those fats too much by roasting them at a high temperature. So what I'm going to do is I pop them straight into the stock pot. And I don't know whether you can see it on screen, but I'll bring it on screen. That is my little container that sits in the door of the freezer. And in there I put in all the bones from my family's meals. So chicken wings, the bones from lamb forequarter chops, from pork chops, from our roast on the weekend. I think there might be a pork shoulder bone in there somewhere. Yep, there is. And I throw these babies in. These have beautiful flavor, and let me tell you that not every bit of goodness has come out of these bones yet, not by a long shot. So I pour them into my stock pot, and it doesn't matter what variety of bones I have in there. Literally everything is in there. Filled up my stock pot with water. I use filtered water. I try not to use town water wherever possible, just because of the chlorine and the fluoride. That's a personal choice. I highly recommend that you consider that while you're on the GAPS diet, that chlorine and fluoride are not healthy for the body, and especially if you have a thyroid condition, it would be pertinent to get a filter that can filter those out. And I'm just going to get down off my soapbox for a minute. Okay, so what I've done is I've filled up my stock pot. You'll notice that I haven't filled it all the way to the top, and that's because I still have my bones in the oven, and I don't want to overflow it when I get those out. Now what we're going to do now is important, and it's a step that's often missed. We're going to add apple cider vinegar to this. It's about a half a cup. Again, I'm really terrible for measuring things out. That's about half a cup. And what we're going to do is, while the bones, the rib bones and the neck bones are cooking in the oven, I'm going to leave this sitting, not turned on, it's cold, just sitting on the stove top, soaking with the apple cider vinegar in the water, and that's going to begin to soften and start to move the minerals from the bones out into the liquid. And it does this because I'm creating a slightly acidic environment, which does help to draw the minerals out. So we're going to leave that sitting for a while. You'll notice that I haven't added the vegetables, and the reason that I haven't added the vegetables is because they just don't need to be in there at the moment, and they can, I don't know, it's just one of those things. You don't add the veggies while you're soaking it with the apple cider vinegar. So we're going to leave that to soak until the bones are ready. So I'm starting to get ready with my vegetables now. Now, if you can see my veggies here, I've got some lovely celery there, and I've got some onions. If you've made stock before, or you've done some reading, or you just happen to know what goes into a basic stock or bone broth, you'll notice that there's a vegetable missing. I'm missing the carrots. I thought I was so organized. This is me, organized chaos, let's be honest. But I almost didn't go ahead with this. I thought I'll have to go out and get the carrots. And I thought, no, this is the perfect opportunity to teach you guys my new mantra for the year. And my new mantra for the year is, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Okay? A bone broth cooks from 18 to 24 hours on your stovetop. And I'll talk a little bit more about cooking times and, you know, leaving it cooking when you're not around, that sort of thing. But you're cooking it for 18 to 24 hours. I have 18 to 24 hours to go out and get my carrots and pop them in this stock. So you'll notice in the recipe that you have in your recipes for week 1 that it should have a couple of carrots in it. I don't have any carrots, so we'll just move on without it and pretend like they're there. Now, you don't have to do anything pretty with these. This is what I love about this sort of cooking is it doesn't have to be chopped up all pretty. We are literally just going to cut some chunks. I do leaves and all. You know, some of the best chefs in the world will tell you don't put the leaves in, it makes the bone broth bitter. I don't have those kind of taste buds. I haven't tasted it bitter, so I put them in. There's lots of goodies in there. My onions, leave the skin on. You don't need to take the skin off. You're going to be filtering all of this stuff out anyway. I just cut it in half, pop it in, and if I had my carrots here, I'd chop them into maybe 3 pieces each and throw them in as well. And now we're going to get the bones out of the oven and add them in as well. Our bones that have been roasting in the oven, and as you can see, I've had this stock boiling on the stove. Well, not boiling, it's very slowly coming up to a boil, and you can see that there's some scum starting to come out of it, and we're actually going to skim that off, but not quite yet because we're not ready. There's not enough there, and it's going to produce way more than that. So I'm just going to go ahead and pop these bones in. I have cooled them. And you can see the water levels come way up, so where I had the water was good. Now I've just got to wait for it to come gently up to the boil, and as it comes up it'll produce more and more scum, and then we can skim that scum off and throw it away, and then turn it down to a very, very low and slow boil. You don't want this boiling rapidly because you don't want it to run dry before the 18 to 24 hours. Of course, if the water level is going down, you can add a little bit more water to it. That's no problem at all. But we do want it to boil slowly. So I tend to put it on my smallest burner at the lowest setting and leave the lid on. And I'll pop the lid on now and wait for that to come up to the boil. You'll notice I have not added any seasonings, no salt, no pepper. I haven't added any herbs. This is my base broth that I use for all of my cooking, so all of my soups, my stocks, my sauces, and I want to flavour those as I go, so I don't really want to be adding in the flavourings now. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead slightly now because obviously the stock that I've just put on the stove is now going to cook for between 18 and 24 hours. Let's talk a little bit about that, because what we have there is you don't want to leave your stock boiling overnight or while you go out of the house. So the 18 to 24 hours can actually run over a couple of days, and yes, it is okay to do that because you're continually bringing it up to the boil and simmering it over long periods of time. So if I leave the house, I switch it off. If I go to bed, I switch it off. I have had one disaster where I left it slowly bubbling overnight, and I thought it would be okay, and it totally was not, and the house stunk for weeks. I couldn't get rid of the smell, so don't do that. So of course this means I'm filming this on a Wednesday, so generally speaking I wouldn't take my broth off and strain it until probably Friday, by the time I've switched it off and switched it back on a few times. So what I'm doing is skipping ahead, because obviously you probably know how to run your stock through a strainer. I use a fine mesh sieve like this one, just a cheapie, and I just run it through there. I don't bother with cloth or anything, I'm just not that fussy, and I will strain it off into some pots, and usually once it's kind of cooled a bit, you do want it a little bit warm so all the fats are still liquid, and then I pour mine into jars like this. This is just an old coconut oil jar, and I store mine in jars in the fridge. You can store them in the freezer, but I store mine in the fridge. They last perfectly well for about 2 to 3 weeks in the fridge, especially with this nice fat layer that you have here. It protects it from the air. And I will take out scoops of mine. It's a nice gel, and I'll show you the consistency in a moment, and I will reconstitute that into whatever it is I'm making. So I might use 1 jar of this size, maybe 3/4 of this jar to make a whole big pot of soup. I'll reconstitute that with water, or I might take a big heaped tablespoon of it to make a drinking broth, or I might take a couple of tablespoons of it to make a sauce or a gravy. So I'll show you the consistency it should look, and you can see it's just a nice wobbly jelly, and that's what yours should look like. One of my tips for making sure that you get a nice gel is to include some sort of pork bone in it. They seem to have a lot more gelatin in the bones. So I use, as you saw in this one, I had a pork shoulder go in from my leftover bones. But the other thing you could chuck in is a pork trotter. That works really well too. And just with the long boiling times and actually reducing that liquid down to basically 2 jars worth of stock, you will get a nice gel. So that's the bone broth. Okay, let's talk about meat stock. Meat stock's a little bit different. I tend to use a specific cut of meat for my meat stock, depending on, you know, what flavour I feel like drinking. I often use this one as a drinking broth. It's got a beautiful flavour. Or, for instance, if I want to make a chicken soup, I tend to use the chicken meat stock, again, because of the beautiful flavour. So I've got my trusty old pot here. Mine's a fairly small one. You can get a bigger one, and you can get more of the cut of meat that you want. I think the one drawback of making meat stock is it never seems to make enough. They're always, like, I always feel like I could make more, and possibly if I had a bigger pot that would fit in my oven, I could actually do that. The beauty of meat stock is that it cooks really quickly. This one's only cooked for, I think the longest I've done it is 3 hours, and that was with a lamb shank. You want it to the point where the meat is starting to fall off the bone, because the other bonus of a meat stock is that you get all that beautiful soft shredded meat off the bones that you can then either just put with your lunches, or you can turn into another dish. So as well as getting your beautiful stock, you get some shredded meat with it as well. And it's really simple on ingredients. So today I'm going to use chicken wings, which is my favorite one to use. It creates a beautiful gel, and I really love the chicken drinking broth. It's my favorite. So I use about 1 kilo of the chicken wings, and I'm just going to go ahead and throw them in there. Now, this one you want to just pour some water over the top. Here's one I prepared earlier. And you just want a little tiny bit of the meat poking out there. With chicken it doesn't matter quite so much. You don't really need that caramelization like you do with the lamb one. I'm going to add in 2 bay leaves. I know this looks really odd, but I grow my own bay, and I just kind of pick off a twig when I'm ready for some more. So I'll put 2 bay leaves in there. And this is my Celtic sea salt. I kind of like salt. I'm a very adrenal person, but the salt really makes this broth. It gives it that traditional and expected chicken soup flavor. So go ahead and use as much salt as you like. I'm a salt person. Again, I'm adrenal, I crave salt, and I like salt. And I'm using a good quality salt, so I'm not going to get all fear-based about how much salt I use in my diet. I'm going to pop the lid on for this one. And you'll notice that I didn't put any apple cider vinegar into that. And this one, we don't really need it. It's not there long enough. It's more of a meat stock than a bone broth. So I'm not really trying to strip the minerals out of the bones, so we don't use it for this one. I'm going to pop it into the oven at about 160 degrees. Sometimes I put it on for less time and at a lower temperature. Sometimes I put it on a higher temperature. It depends how busy I am, how quickly I want that stock to cook. So that's in there now, and when it comes out, we'll show you the result. Okay, so let's have a little look at our meat stock that we had in the oven earlier. It's been in the oven for about 2 hours. I must admit I did forget about it, and being chicken wings, it probably only needed an hour and a half, but it'll be fine. So I'm going to take the lid off. And what you can see there is a beautiful chicken stock. All of that meat is just going to peel straight off the bone. I'll just grab a fork. So you can see that meat is really just peeling back from the bone. And you can see all of the fat globules just floating on the surface of the stock. That is going to be a delicious stock, and I'm going to use that as my drinking stock over the next few days. And again, we just strain that through a metal sieve. You can scrape all that meat off the bone and use it for another meal, and then you can keep your drinking broth in the fridge. This one I don't dilute, and that's why it doesn't last very long. It doesn't need to be diluted. It's full of flavor just the way it is. So I drink this straight out of the fridge. I just reheat what I want from it.